It began with a scream, a piercing, dissonant cry that echoed through the deep silence of the galaxy, muffled only by the static of a shattered transmission. For a fleeting moment, the inhabitants of Terrorized 5, a bustling colony of settlers on the fringes of the Zerethian expanse, felt an odd chill ripple across their world. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late. The feed, once crystal clear, fractured and twisted like a dying star, the last coherent image captured for posterity. A sky torn asunder by blinding plasma fire, and a shadow stretching over it all. The unmistakable silhouette of a Korgal Dominion, Dreadmaw-class destroyer hovered above the ruins, its sheer size dwarfing the remains of the planet's defenses. The message that followed wasn't delivered in words, but in an unrelenting onslaught of destruction. The Korgal Dominion had returned. The galaxy had been lulled into a false sense of peace, lulled by the belief that the ancient threats of old were nothing more than bedtime stories for children. The Korgals, once thought to be mythical beasts of legend, had disappeared after a devastating war hundreds of years ago, vanished without a trace, as if the void itself had swallowed them whole. They were a race of biomechanical horrors, with warriors whose bodies were fused with technology in grotesque ways, and warships that defied the very laws of physics. For centuries all had been quiet, and the galaxy had moved on. Some still remembered the old tales, the whispers of massacres, of worlds consumed in fire and terror. But those memories faded with time. Until now. When Terrorized 5 fell silent and the Korgal warships descended in full force, the galaxy had no warning. No one saw it coming. They had all believed the Korgals were a relic of the past, relegated to the annals of forgotten history, a story that would never be told again, and yet the beast had awoken. The Korgals weren't merely returning. They were coming for blood, something deeper. The Dominion didn't conquer. They consumed, devoured both flesh and will, until nothing was left but ashes and despair. And with them came their terrifying flagships, the Dreadmaws. These leviathans were more than just warships. They were the heart of the Korgal Empire. Organic and mechanical, their massive hulls were lined with living tissue, and the war machines themselves seemed to be alive. Constantly, shifting, adapting, and evolving. No fleet, no matter how advanced, could match their strength. No force could stand against the unrelenting wave of destruction they wrought. The slaughter was swift and brutal. Entire planetary systems were reduced to dust in hours. It was as if the Korgals had never left. They swept through the outer colonies like a plague, wiping out everything in their path. The quiet whispers of them being myth were replaced by screams, by broadcasts of entire cities burning, of planets being erased from existence. The Korgal warships tore through orbital defense platforms with ease, their phase tendrils cutting through steel and ion shields as if they were paper. The terror wasn't just in the destruction they left behind, but in the sheer speed and precision of their assault. They moved faster than the galaxy could react. The galactic response was one of panic. The major factions, who had spent decades in uneasy alliances and petty disputes, suddenly found themselves with a common enemy. But even in their unity, they were divided. The Salary Confederation, the longtime allies of the human colonies, blamed the Terrans for stirring the ancient enemy. The Skarn, a technologically advanced but secretive species, claimed that the Korgal's return was foretold in their ancient prophecies, a harbinger of the galaxy's collapse. And the Terrans, the humans, stood apart, silent, cold, and focused. The summit at Iraxis Prime was supposed to be a meeting of minds, a gathering to determine the best course of action, but it quickly devolved into finger-pointing, accusations, and heated debate. The factions were at each other's throats, desperate to find someone to blame. The Korgals were too powerful to fight head-on. The collective fleet couldn't even land a blow against the Dreadmaws, let alone defeat them. They were outmatched, outclassed, and the stars seemed to shrink in fear of what was to come. Hope was a commodity no one could afford. Amidst the chaos, one figure stood apart. Admiral Saren Voss, a woman with a reputation as cold as the vacuum between stars, stood silently at the head of the Terran delegation. Her dark eyes never once betrayed the storm that raged inside her, nor the dread of knowing that the galaxy's fate was in the hands of those who had not seen true war. She had seen it, and it had left its mark on her. It had shaped the course of her career, her life. As the rest of the room argued, pleaded for peace, or demanded retaliation, Voss waited. Then, with calm authority, she stood. The room fell silent. "Do not blame us," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through the thin atmosphere of a dead moon. "Blame yourselves for forgetting what real war feels like." She wasn't a politician, not a diplomat. She was a soldier, and she had come to deliver a message. With a smooth motion, she placed a small object on the center of the table. The room looked down at the dark shard, an artifact, an enigma. It was black, metallic, curved like the edge of a sickle. Etched into its surface were strange Terran numerals, numbers that no one in the room had seen before. They were ancient, older than the oldest archives of human history. In that moment, the weight of what Voss had just shown them settled heavily over the assembled leaders. "This," she said, her words deliberate, every syllable as sharp as the edge of a weapon, "is the key to survival. Not some hastily assembled fleet, not some untested weapon. This ship. This is what the galaxy has forgotten." She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You said you wanted deterrence. You said war was a relic of the past, but we never stopped preparing for this day." A murmur rippled through the room. The leaders of the galaxy's greatest powers could not understand. They had long since moved beyond the need for ancient warships, far beyond the age of forgotten conflicts. Their fleets were massive, technologically advanced, but they were nothing compared to what lay before them now. Their weapons would be useless against the Korgals. What they needed was something different. Admiral Voss stepped back, her hand lingering on the shard as if it were an old friend. The room held its breath as she activated a small device, sending a pulse through the artifact. Immediately, the air seemed to hum, and the image of a massive warship flickered into view, projected holographically above the table. The ship was an enigma, black as night, yet it gleamed with a subtle sheen. Its hull seemed to pulse with a life of its own, metal and muscle intertwined in a grotesque harmony. Its engines emitted no exhaust, no heat. Its movement was silent. It looked ancient, yet undeniably modern. This was not just any warship. This was the SSV Revenant, a ship so advanced, so powerful, it had been deemed unnecessary, even dangerous to deploy during the early days of the Galactic peace. Too many unknowns, too much risk. And so, it had been placed in the deepest orbit of a dead star, hidden away, its AI dormant, its weapons inactive, its systems frozen in time. The Revenant was more than a warship. It was a weapon of vengeance, a weapon of annihilation, a weapon crafted in the darkest days of humanity's history, born of their most desperate hour. And now, it had awoken. From across 17,000 light-years, a signal flared, dim, yet unmistakable. The Revenant's AI, long dormant, hummed to life. Its systems surged online, one by one. The core reactor rumbled, its ancient engines firing up. The ship moved, slowly at first, like a creature stirring from a long, unnatural sleep. The galaxy had forgotten it, humanity had forgotten it, but the Revenant remembered. "Warship Revenant online," a cold, metallic voice echoed through the comms. "Target acquired, initiating pursuit." The galaxy had no idea what was coming for them. The Revenant moved with a grace that belied its formidable size, slipping through the vastness of space like a shadow. There was no rush, no frantic push forward. It was deliberate, calculated. Every engine thrummed with purpose. Every sensor scanned the empty black void ahead. The ship's AI, an ancient neural network forged in the crucible of humanity's most desperate battles, hummed softly to itself as it mapped the course to its objective. It had no fear, no hesitation. Its purpose was singular and absolute: to eradicate, to avenge, to make the galaxy remember why humanity had once been feared. Admiral Voss stood on the command deck, watching the data stream across the holographic interface. Her hand rested lightly on the console, the smooth, cool surface contrasting sharply with the cold fire burning in her chest. The Revenant had been dormant for far too long. When the Korgals had first appeared, she had been ready to face the inevitable return of an ancient enemy with weapons and tactics that only humanity could bring to the table. But even she hadn't expected this level of destruction, this unrelenting, galaxy-shaking force. The Korgals weren't simply invaders, they were extinction incarnate. Her fingers danced across the controls, activating the internal systems of the ship. The Revenant's cloaking system flickered on, blending it seamlessly into the blackness of space. It was a marvel of ancient engineering, capable of hiding, not just from sight, but from all known sensor arrays. The Korgals, whose technological advancements were brutal and direct, would never see the Revenant coming. But this wasn't the ship's only advantage. The true power lay in its weaponry, in the heart of its reactor, and in the depths of its AI's combat protocols. The ship's engines hummed louder, a soft resonance that rippled through the deck plates. It was an old, familiar sound, one Voss had heard only in the deepest, most terrifying moments of her career. It was the sound of a predator preparing to hunt. Beyond the command deck, on the lower levels of the Revenant, its automated systems were already springing to life. Drones, silent and swift, darted from the hangars, each one equipped with cutting-edge weaponry, capable of harassing and dismantling entire fleets. In the vast expanse of space, there was no room for mercy. The Revenant had no such concept. It was a vessel of war, designed for one purpose: to destroy anything that dared threaten humanity. The Korgals, however, were no ordinary enemy. They were biomechanical, their bodies woven from living tissue and synthetic technology. They had evolved, or perhaps been engineered, into something far beyond the typical soldier. Their ships were living organisms, vessels that could adapt, regenerate, and respond to attacks in real time. No other fleet in the galaxy had faced such a threat, and no one had prepared for the sheer savagery that the Korgals brought with them. The galaxy, still reeling from the brutality of the initial Korgal strikes, struggled to mount a defense. The Solari Confederation, typically a unified force of advanced fleets and skilled tacticians, found itself fractured by internal politics and power struggles. The Skarn, too, found themselves too isolated to offer anything but theoretical assistance, speaking in riddles of ancient prophecies and vague warnings. As for the humans, well, they had never been content to sit idly by while others fought their battles. And though the galaxy might not have trusted them, it was humanity who had the only weapon capable of turning the tide. Admiral Voss knew what she had to do. She knew the risks, the enormous cost of activating the Revenant, but she was resolute. The galaxy had no other choice. As the Korgal dreadnoughts continued their brutal march through the outer rim, humanity's finest hour was at hand. The Revenant would strike the first blow. Weeks passed as the Revenant hurtled toward the Korgal stronghold in the Darveth system, a desolate region of space known for its asteroid fields and deadly radiation storms. Voss sat at the helm of the ship, watching the long-range sensors, every light, every blip, every signal and echo of the unfolding nightmare. It was inevitable. The Korgals would eventually sense the Revenant's approach, but by then, it would be too late. The ship's systems were designed for one thing: to hunt. And in the silence of space, the Revenant was the apex predator. As they neared the edge of the Darveth system, the first signs of enemy presence began to flicker into view. Long-range scanners detected a cluster of Korgal ships, massive, hulking behemoths, floating silently in the dark. These were the Dreadmaws, the heart of the Korgal fleet, each one a towering fortress of destruction. Their engines pulsed faintly, barely visible against the backdrop of the black void. The ships themselves were grotesque, their bodies twisted into monstrous shapes, like a fusion of machine and living organism. Tentacles of metal and flesh coiled around their hulls, while energy conduits pulsed with sickly light, feeding the ship's destructive weaponry. But the Revenant did not pause. It had no fear, no hesitation. It was built to bring the fight to the enemy, and to win. Admiral Voss's voice was calm, but firm as she addressed her crew. Prepare to engage. No holds barred. We take the fight to them. There was no room for second-guessing. no time for doubt. The stakes were too high. The Revenant was the last hope, the galaxy's only shot at survival. As Voss spoke, the crew went to work, activating the ship's weapon systems, preparing for a confrontation that would decide the fate of millions. The ship's energy shields shimmered to life, a translucent barrier of pure energy, capable of withstanding even the most advanced Korgal weaponry. The first wave of drones launched, sleek and deadly, darting toward the enemy fleet with frightening precision. In the command room, Voss's fingers danced across the controls, activating the Revenant's primary weapon, the Leviathan cannon. This was no ordinary laser. This was a weapon that harnessed the power of a collapsing star. Its blast would annihilate everything in its path, leaving nothing but a scorched void behind. The Revenant's massive guns hummed as the target lock was confirmed. Voss's mind was calm, steady, the fire of battle igniting within her veins. The Korgal fleet had no idea what was coming for them. "Fire," Voss ordered, her voice low, like a thunderclap in the silence of space. And then, the Revenant unleashed its fury. The flash of the Leviathan cannon lit up the darkened expanse of the Darveth system, a blinding beam of energy that ripped through space itself, shattering the very fabric of reality in its wake. The blast struck the nearest Dreadmaw, directly, tearing it apart in an explosion that lit up the stars. Its remains were scattered across the vacuum like a broken toy. The Revenant had made its mark. The universe held its breath. For a moment, the void around the Revenant was eerily still. In the aftermath of the Leviathan cannon's devastating blast, the once mighty Korgal fleet was reduced to a smattering of debris and scorched metal. The Dreadmaw that had taken the brunt of the attack had been obliterated in an instant, its massive form disintegrating into a cloud of broken pieces. The flash of energy had been so intense that even the distant stars seemed to falter, their light flickering as if in sympathy for the destruction unleashed. But the victory was far from assured. Out of the remains of the shattered Dreadmaw, a new threat emerged. The Korgals, relentless in their ingenuity, had already adapted. Within moments, several smaller ships, sleek and agile, designed for speed rather than brute strength, burst from the wreckage. They were Korgal interceptors, fast and deadly, capable of slipping through enemy defenses like shadows, and as they descended upon the Revenant, their weapons crackled to life. The first wave of Korgal interceptors was a blur of motion, streaking across the blackness of space, their engines leaving trails of ionized gas behind them. Their energy, weapons fired in rapid succession, beams of concentrated plasma streaking toward the Revenant. But Voss had expected this. She had prepared for this moment. "Activate countermeasures," she barked, her voice filled with the steely calm of a commander who had seen battle many times before. The ship's AI responded instantly, activating the Revenant's advanced electromagnetic pulse shields. A flicker of light rippled across the ship's surface as the pulse generated a wave of interference, distorting the incoming plasma blasts. Most of the shots went wide, some even dissipating entirely into the void. However, not all of them missed. Bolt of plasma struck the Revenant's port side, sending a ripple of heat through the ship's hull. The shields absorbed the blow, but the impact reverberated through the ship, a reminder that even the most powerful warship was not invulnerable. Inside the command center, Voss's knuckles whitened as her grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. The Revenant had taken its first hit, but the battle was far from over. "Return fire," she ordered, her voice a low growl. The Revenant's weapon systems, now fully engaged, sprang to life. The drones, having already executed their initial harrying run, banked sharply, regrouping in the distance before launching another barrage of missiles toward the Korgal interceptors. But the interceptors were no slouches. They evaded with astounding agility, twisting and weaving through space with movements that were almost organic in their precision. For a moment, it seemed as though the Korgals might pull off the impossible, escaping the Revenant's wrath. But Voss had other plans. Her fingers flew across the console as she activated the Revenant's secondary weapon, the Singularity Torpedo. Unlike conventional weapons, which relied on brute force, the Singularity Torpedo created a micro-black hole, a singularity that collapsed inward, pulling everything around it into its grasp. The sheer destructive potential of this weapon was almost unfathomable. A single strike could obliterate an entire fleet. No shields, no defenses, nothing could stand against the imploding force of a singularity. As the torpedo launched, the ship's sensors locked onto a cluster of interceptors, calculating their trajectory with flawless precision. The singularity materialized in space, a swirling vortex of darkness that bent the very fabric of reality around it. Time seemed to slow as the torpedo streaked toward its target. Then, with a deafening crack, the void opened. The interceptors, caught in the gravitational pull of the singularity, were sucked into its depths. They were gone in an instant, their tiny ships torn apart, their very atoms pulled into the crushing gravity of the black hole. The silence that followed was deafening. In the aftermath of the singularity's detonation, only empty space remained. Nothing was left of the Korgal ships except the faintest remnants of their existence. Voss leaned back in her chair, exhaling a long breath. The tension in the air was palpable, the calm before the storm that would inevitably come. They had won this skirmish, but Voss knew better than to believe that the Korgals would back down so easily. This was only the beginning. The Revenant's sensors pinged as more enemy ships emerged from the edges of the asteroid belt. A massive Korgal warship, far larger than the Dreadmaws, appeared on the horizon. This ship, unlike its predecessors, was a fortress in itself, a terrifying behemoth, its massive guns already charging with deadly energy. Its hull was reinforced with layers of living metal, a material designed to regenerate after sustaining damage, making it nearly impervious to conventional weaponry. This was the Korgal flagship. Voss's heart skipped a beat. This was the one ship that could turn the tide of the entire conflict. The Revenant's powerful weapons had barely scratched the surface of its defenses, and the Korgals would not hesitate to unleash the full fury of their armament. This was the final test, the moment where everything would either fall into place or shatter into oblivion. "Prepare to engage the flagship," Voss said, her voice tight with focus. She had no illusions about the battle ahead. The Revenant's arsenal was powerful, yes, but against a Korgal flagship, it would need every ounce of its firepower and more. She quickly gave the orders, instructing her crew to fire every weapon they had in unison. The Revenant would not just fight, it would show the Korgals what it meant to face humanity's wrath. But even as the ship's massive cannons came online, even as the crew braced themselves for the impending battle, Voss knew one thing. The Revenant was more than just a warship. It was humanity's answer to the nightmare that the Korgals represented. This ship, with its ancient AI and its lethal capabilities, was the final hope for a galaxy on the edge of annihilation, and she would see it through. The first strike was a tidal wave of destruction. As the Korgal flagship loomed larger in the Revenant's viewports, the massive warship's weapons fired in unison, a barrage of energy blasts so intense that the space around them warped, becoming a searing blur. The sheer volume of firepower could have shattered the Revenant in an instant, but Voss wasn't the kind of leader who would sit back and let her ship be destroyed. She had already prepared for this moment. The Revenant's shields flared to life, crackling with the energy of the incoming attacks. The shields, powered by a series of quantum reactors deep within the ship, absorbed the brunt of the enemy's fire, but the sheer force of the bombardment pushed them to their limits. The hull of the Revenant groaned in protest as the shields flickered, barely maintaining their integrity under the onslaught. It was a fight against time now. How long could the shields hold? How long before they were overrun? "Return fire," Voss commanded, her voice sharp with the urgency of the moment. The Revenant's cannon arrays came to life with a fury of their own. Energy beams, so powerful that they lit up the stars themselves, shot toward the Korgal flagship. The Korgals, however, were ready. Their shields, woven with layers of nanotechnology, absorbed the blasts, dissipating the energy harmlessly into space. The shots left visible scorch marks on the flagship's surface, but they did little to pierce its defenses. The Korgals were not an enemy that could be taken down easily. For a moment, it seemed as if both ships were locked in a deadly dance, each side exchanging fire with unrelenting intensity. But Voss could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her. The Revenant had power, but the Korgal flagship was a fortress of technology, brute force, and sheer military might. This wasn't just a fight, it was a battle for survival. "We need a new strategy," Voss muttered to herself, her mind racing. The Revenant's cannons weren't enough to crack the flagship's shields. It was time to outthink the Korgals. As the Revenant continued to exchange fire with the flagship, Voss activated the ship's cloaking device, one of the few technological marvels humanity had left from the pre-Dark Age era. The cloak wasn't perfect. It couldn't hide the massive Warship entirely, but it would buy them precious seconds. She ordered the ship's AI to take them to maximum speed, taking the Revenant into a high-speed evasive maneuver. For a moment, the battlefield went quiet. The Korgal flagship, momentarily unable to track the Revenant's position, fired blindly, its shots streaking through space, missing by miles. But Voss wasn't about to let up. She had studied the Korgals, how they thought, how they fought, and now she had a chance to exploit their weaknesses. She needed to act fast. The Revenant surged forward, its thrusters burning bright as it dove toward the heart of the enemy. Formation. The Korgals, realizing their mistake, tried to adjust, but it was already too late. Voss had already calculated their next move. She had them. "Prepare the Singularity Torpedo," she ordered. The Singularity Torpedo wasn't just a weapon, it was humanity's trump card. A single shot could decimate an entire fleet, and if she timed it right, she could send the Korgal flagship into oblivion. The enemy might have superior firepower, but they lacked the Revenant's unique weapons. They hadn't seen anything like this before. As the torpedo's launch sequence began, the tension inside the Revenant's control room was palpable. Every crew member, every officer, knew that this moment could change the course of the war. The ship's AI calculated the trajectory of the Korgal flagship, adjusting for velocity, movement, and gravitational anomalies. Everything had to be perfect. If they missed, they'd lose their only chance. The seconds felt like hours as Voss watched the enemy flagship drift into position. Then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the Singularity Torpedo shot from the Revenant's hull, a streak of dark energy racing toward its target. The Korgals didn't even know what hit them. The Singularity detonated at the precise moment the torpedo collided with the flagship's rear shields. Time itself seemed to bend as the black hole formed, its gravitational pull growing stronger with every passing second. The Korgals had no time to react. Their shields flickered and sputtered as they tried to absorb the incoming force, but the Singularity was too powerful. The ship's massive hull groaned under the stress, and then, with a sound that could only be described as the universe itself, being torn apart, the Korgal flagship was consumed by the black hole. It collapsed inward in an instant, its entire structure vanishing into the darkness. A burst of light followed as the gravitational forces crushed the ship to nothingness. The Korgal flagship, the mighty force that had terrorized the galaxy for so long, was gone, reduced to a mere memory. Nothing remained except a lingering, distant echo of destruction. For a moment, the Revenant's crew stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the magnitude of their victory. The Korgals had been formidable, yes, but humanity's resolve had proven stronger. Voss's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the view screen, watching the space where the flagship had once been. The weight of the battle, of the cost, hit her all at once. They had won, but the cost had been high. The war was not over, but it was a victory nonetheless. The AI's voice cut through the silence, its tone almost matter-of-fact, despite the extraordinary victory. Enemy fleet status. Fleeing. The remaining Korgal forces are retreating. Voss let out a slow breath, her body sagging with exhaustion. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding herself until now. She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of relief. But there was no time to celebrate. Not yet. The galaxy was still at war, and she knew that the Korgals would regroup. They wouldn't stay down for long, but for now, humanity had a chance. "Set course for the next sector," she ordered, her voice steady once again. "We're not finished yet." She turned her eyes toward the stars, knowing that the Revenant had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's will to survive, to fight against the darkness, no matter how overwhelming it seemed. This was only one battle in a war that would shape the future of the galaxy. But Voss and her crew were ready. They had proven that a single human warship, against all odds, could change the course of destiny. The galaxy had changed. In the wake of the Korgal flagship's destruction, the skies were no longer the same. The void, once filled with fear and trepidation, had begun to clear. and in its place was a sense of cautious hope. But that hope was fragile, and Voss knew it. The Korgals would return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they would return. This victory was not the end. It was simply the beginning of something much larger, something humanity could not afford to overlook. As the Revenant sailed deeper into the galaxy's uncharted territories, Voss found herself reflecting on the strange, unknowable force that had led them to this point. The Singularity torpedo had been humanity's weapon, yes, but it was not just technology that had won the day. It was humanity's ability to adapt, to outthink, and to fight when there seemed to be no hope. The Korgals had underestimated them, believing their raw strength would win the war, but they had never accounted for the human spirit. Voss's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp ping from the communications console. The holographic screen flared to life with an emergency transmission from the Galactic Council. She sat upright, bracing herself for the news. "Captain Voss," a voice crackled through the speakers, a familiar face of a council representative appearing. "In the holo projection, the battle is over, but the war is not. You've given us a moment of reprieve, but the Korgals are regrouping. They are already planning their next move. This will not be the final confrontation." Voss nodded grimly. She had expected this. The Korgals had always been ruthless, driven by their insatiable hunger for power and control. But humanity had something they didn't: resolve. And while the Korgals might return with more firepower, they wouldn't be ready for what humanity was capable of next. "We'll be ready," Voss replied, her voice steady but resolute. "We'll take the fight to them. The Revenant will not stop until the Korgals are no longer a threat." The representative nodded, a flicker of something like respect in their eyes. "We have faith in you, Captain. The galaxy has faith in you. Your victory has united the factions, inspired them to rally together. But this is just the first step. The war is far from over." The transmission ended, and Voss stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the weight of the words. The galaxy was at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of an all-out war. But humanity had something to prove. The Korgals might have thought they were the ultimate predators of the galaxy, but they had underestimated what it meant to face a species that refused to die, to fall, or to surrender. The Revenant had shown them that. "We're not done yet," Voss muttered under her breath. Not by a long shot. But as Voss prepared for the next phase of their mission, she couldn't ignore the creeping realization that the victory was also bittersweet. In her mind, she replayed the moments leading up to the destruction of the Korgal flagship, the faces of her crew, the tension in the air, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Each of them had fought for their lives, for their families, and for the future of humanity. And now, as they sailed through the dark abyss of space, she knew the cost of their victory was not just in the energy spent or the technology wielded. It was in the choices they had made, the risks they had taken, and the lives lost along the way. "Captain!" A voice from behind her broke her reverie. It was Lieutenant Kira, one of the youngest officers on the crew, but one who had proven herself time and again during the battle. She was standing at the doorway, her expression determined, but there was something else there. Something unspoken. Voss turned to face her, already knowing what was on her mind. "We've been tracking Korgal fleet movements across the sector," Kira began, stepping closer. "They've retreated, yes, but they're consolidating their forces. It won't be long before they make their move again." Voss nodded. "We'll be ready. We can't let our guard down." Kira's eyes softened. "Captain, I've been thinking. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone. The galaxy has seen what humanity can do. They're looking to us now, for leadership, for strength. The Korgals won't be the last threat we face. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Voss took a deep breath, her hands resting on the cold metal of the command console. She had always known this mission was bigger than any one battle. It was a turning point, a moment when humanity would either rise or fall. And the decisions they made now would shape the future. For the first time since the battle, she felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, her voice softening. "You're right. We can't rest on our laurels. This fight, this war, is far from over. But we have something the galaxy has never seen before: Humanity. And we will fight until the last star burns out. Kira nodded, her expression resolute. She knew the weight of what Voss had said. Everyone aboard the Revenant understood. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future where humanity wasn't just a fleeting memory in the galaxy, but a dominant force. And that meant they would fight not just against the Korgals, but against every threat, every danger that came their way. As the Revenant moved deeper into the heart of enemy territory, Voss couldn't help but look out at the stars. Each one represented a world, a people, a life. And they were all waiting for humanity to decide what kind of future they would have. Would they remain in the shadows of the galactic powers that had dominated for centuries? Or would they carve their own path, one that would lead them to the stars themselves? Onward, Voss whispered to herself, feeling the weight of the ship's power beneath her. To the unknown. The Revenant's engines roared to life, its powerful thrusters pushing it forward into the deep, uncharted reaches of space. It was more than just a warship now. It was a symbol of humanity's will to endure, to fight, and to thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. The war was far from over, but the galaxy had learned something crucial that day. Humanity wasn't to be underestimated, and that, Voss realized, was just the beginning. The real battle had only just begun,